Imagine Sang Jin-woo, but a fish. That's possibly the worst explanation I could have given you for this manhwa. Because this is actually peak. You know, I thought this was just some ridiculous concept. You know, big executive for a company dies and gets reincarnated as a fish. So I went into this thinking this was just a silly story that I won't have to take seriously. But the more I read, the more I realized that this story is more nuanced and intricate than most manhwa will ever be. The idea is so bizarre that it shouldn't work under any circumstance, but somehow it just does. It manages to turn this ridiculous premise into an interesting and actually entertaining story. Anyways, let's just get into the story first. So this guy, he's a company executive, and one day, the chairman of the company he works for and a friend of his plans an attack on him and brings him to a fishing boat. He then proceeds to pull one of the most evil monologues by saying, "You're a very smart man. It's thanks to you that I was able to become chairman in the first place. But that makes you terrifying. You're like a ticking time bomb, and that's why I just have to kill you. And you'll probably turn into a fish, but I don't know that though." Wait, what? He then gets a notification from the system, asking him if he wants to start over. Look, it's a system manhwa, which as you can probably tell, I don't really like most of them. At this point, they just feel really boring and repetitive. Hear me out though, a system manhwa, but fish. On a serious note though, I don't really mind a system manhwa if it's incorporated well into the story and is of aid to the plot. What this manhwa does, it uses its system to move the plot forward. It gives our protagonist an incentive to keep going. But more on that later, back to the story. Because he takes too long to decide which fish he's gonna be, the system decides for him and makes him a big mouth bass. He then has to complete the tutorial given to him by the system by eating stuff to level up. But he kinda sucks. Like he's getting outplayed by actual fish. They're even making fun of him. Me personally, I wouldn't let that slide. He even has a fish there to protect him, and he's dead. His fish brother then tries to eat him. I swear this is important for the plot, please. And he finally completes the tutorial, but is now all on his own. He then unlocks the main quest and finds out that there are others like him. And the system tells him that there are two ways for him to complete the main quest. You can either complete it by beating all the bosses, or you kill all the other survivors. If you want to be free, you just have to kill them all. Your wish, do whatever it takes. That was kinda weird. Anyways, he then meets another survivor, who I'm just going to call Goldie. But bro, I didn't know they had fish baddies. He's like really distrustful of her, but keeps her around in case he's ever gonna use her. The system then shows him the chairman is now trying to get rid of the protagonist's wife, because she's been snooping around too much. Like bro, leave this man alone. So he's now obviously in a rush. So he then goes on his quest to beat all the bosses, but sometimes this man was just too funny. Especially when they use like manhwa lingo and they're like, huh, what a monster. And it's just a fish fighting a cat. Another time, they're legitimately fighting against humans as fish. That's because his wife got kidnapped. So he as a fish has to fight humans. And the most funny thing is, the fish are actually winning. They legitimately died. Imagine dying to a goldfish and a bass. Bro, I'd be too embarrassed to show up in the afterlife. But what kind of fish even are these? Straight up shooting laser beams. Like imagine throwing hands with a fish and losing. Like sorry, I didn't know fish power scaled to humans. Like they just straight up killed 2 people. Also, this is probably the only manhwa that manages to make me feel bad for a fish. Okay, so remember this guy? Yeah, that's his brother who tried to eat him. But he's probably my second favorite character in the entire manhwa. I mean, he's just a silly guy. And he even saves our protagonist once he becomes part of his pack. And he called himself ambassador. Like, how can you not like this guy? And the thing that cemented him as one of my favorite characters in the manhwa was when he sacrificed himself for the main character. I was just genuinely sad. I mean, look at these lines. Why? He was nothing but a fish. He was nothing but another ordinary fish. But why did he continue to sacrifice himself and fight for me? I guess you never know who or what you'll end up forming true bonds with. I'm sorry, my friend. I promise I'll avenge you. Straight up cinema. And the thing is, this happened while the protagonist was fighting a stork. Imagine looking outside and seeing a fish fight a stork, and the fish is winning. Like, congrats, dude. You've unlocked Schizophrenia Plus. Like, this fish is straight up out here fighting Dark Souls bosses. Because the thing that I haven't mentioned yet is how the artist manages to make these fish actually feel terrifying. The first time the final villain is introduced, they just manage to make him feel so scary and intimidating. I mean, the size difference alone is so terrifying. And even the emotional beats hit so hard in the story. Even though they shouldn't, because I'm looking at a fish crying for his wife. It manages to outperform all these manhwa with simply good storytelling and characterization. Because what I think the beating heart of this manhwa is the main character, because he is a deeply flawed character. And I love that, because there are so many manhwa where you're going to find a bland and uninspiring protagonist. No character flaws, they're just built different, I guess. But he's different. He feels so human. In a medium that is oversaturated with boring protagonists, he's such a breath of fresh air. From the moment you read the first chapter, you can tell that he's kinda messed up. He had to sacrifice everything to get into the position he is in now, trample over other people's dreams, think of people as replaceable pawns, and this made him manipulative, distrustful, calculated and cold. His first reaction to encountering another survivor is running away because he doesn't trust others. His innate reaction is being distrustful. The first thing he thinks when he encounters a possible ally is how can I use her? But once you get to know his backstory, you start to understand him more and more. Growing up poor with his grandma, he wanted the money to protect his family. But his grandma died due to being poor and unable to treat her sickness. And his parents didn't want him because they were poor as well. So that made him think that being poor must be a sin. As misfortune continued to follow him everywhere, it starts to click as to why he behaves the way that he does. These character traits weren't born out of maliciousness, but out of a need to survive and being able to continue to climb the corporate ladder. Deep down, he isn't a bad person, and that shows. Because the closer he got to Goldie, the more he started to care for her, and he was strangely compassionate. Even if he didn't realize it himself, subconsciously, she really meant a lot to him. Even if he thought he was still pretending, someone using another wouldn't selflessly sacrifice himself over and over again. He has flaws, but these flaws were born out of wanting to protect others. His family, and throughout the story we can see how he changes, how views he once held fade away, how he starts to form genuine connections. During his journey he starts to reflect about himself, the way he views life. But his character flaws don't just disappear. Up until the very end he's still distrustful, and this makes the story so interesting. It makes him feel so realistic. And then it hits you, you realize something, that this isn't a story about fish. It's about a man realizing his past mistakes, his character flaws, reflecting on his views and beliefs, realizing that his hyper-focus on work made him blind to everything else, making him neglect his family, the one thing that he swore to protect. And he grows from all that. It's about the journey of a man becoming a better person, a better version of himself. And all this culminates in the last confrontation with the final boss. Because the final boss tries to persuade him, to manipulate him, to make him regress to a state where he does whatever he needs to reach his goal. And that was the final hurdle. With Goldie killing herself and entrusting everything to the main character, everything, the entire journey starts to flash before your eyes. The hilarious, the serious, the tragic, the terrifying, all the downright captivating moments. This entire journey, and with the story reaching its conclusion, you know what's going to happen. Because this is not the same person from the start. He isn't just going to betray Goldie now. He uses the power gained from devouring Goldie and finishes off the final boss. And his wish is ironically ordinary: to bring back all these survivors as humans. A fitting conclusion, with the shaman being arrested and him having learned the value of life. And as the curtains draw on the story, the author asks you, so what do you think? You've watched until the very end, haven't you? And all I have to say is, yeah, I think the fish manhwa is peak. So what? 9 out of 10.